having a good Zman. We are of course in the month of Iyar, and Rav Moshe Feinstein, they said the Shabbos Mevorchen of Chodesh Iyar, he always had a certain amount of sadness, because Chazal say that the redemption will come in the month of Nisan. Even though Mashiach can come any day, but Nisan is the greatest probability. The highest probability of Geula is in the month of Nisan. So every time the month of Nisan is over, we kind of passed the optimal time for Mashiach coming. So he had a certain amount of sadness in the month of Iyar, because it's not Nisan, and therefore the Zman of the Geula is not at its highest point. At the same time, Iyar has something very special. It is brought down in the Sifrei Kabbalah that the month of Iyar is connected to healing. If you take the letters Iyar, Aleph, Yud, Yud, Resh. So Aleph, Yud, Yud, Resh could be an abbreviation. The Aleph is Ani, Yud, Yud is Hashem's name, so Ani Hashem, and the Resh is Rofecha, I am the God that heals you. This is actually a pasuk in the Chumash itself. So Iyar is Mesugal. Iyar is designated for healing. And of course, healing can take different forms. There is what is called Refuas HaNefesh. There is what is called healing of Refuas HaGuf, healing of the body. And Refuas HaNefesh is healing of the soul. So hopefully all of you will be blessed with healing of the body, but as you begin a new Zman, may the month of Iyar also bring healing of the soul. You know, the Rambam himself was, of course, a doctor as well, and the Rambam analogizes spiritual healing to physical healing, because he says when a person has bad midos, bad character traits, that is called a sickness of the soul. And the same way, as when you have a sick body, you have to go to a doctor who knows how to treat the body. When you have a sick soul, you have to go to the doctors of the soul. And the Rambam says the doctors of the soul are the Chachmei HaTorah, the wise scholars of the Torah, who teach people how to heal their souls. So in the month of Iyar, we should be thinking about both Refuas HaNefesh and Refuas HaGuf. We are in a period of time that is known as the counting of the Omer. And just to be sure everybody's on the same page, and I apologize if this will be obvious stuff for many of you, what does the word Omer mean anyway? Omer. So the truth of the matter is, Omer is a surprisingly neutral term. An Omer is simply a measure of grain, like a bushel, a pound, whatever, right? An Omer. And it refers to the fact that on the second day, what's the matter with this chair? Okay. On the second day of Pesach, which is Chol HaMoed in Israel, a barley offering was brought in the Beis HaMikdash, and the volume of that offering was an Omer. So an Omer is a measure of barley. So the Torah says, from the day that you bring the barley sacrifice, you start counting the days until the giving of the Torah, right? So the reason it's called counting of the Omer, so really counting of the Omer is a bit of it doesn't quite make sense. Really what you're doing is you're counting from the Omer, okay? Although again, I admit to you, it's not reflected in the Hebrew term of Svirat HaOmer, but it's really Svira from the Omer, because the Omer is the starting point. Now it's interesting, Chazal make the interesting observation that on Shavuos, the day that we get the Torah, we also bring a grain offering, but the grain offering is wheat. On Pesach, the grain offering that we bring is barley. So you're going from barley to wheat, and the Chazal say a very interesting observation. They say that barley was primarily animal fodder. This is before they invented cholent, right? Barley was usually fed to animals, and wheat was usually eaten by people. So on Pesach, which celebrates freedom, we're still animals. We're free, but we don't have direction. We don't have purpose. On Shavuos, where we're given our marching orders, we're given our obligations, we're given our responsibilities. That is the metamorphosis from animal liberation to human dignity. Okay, that's why the Omer is barley. Now, in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the Korban HaOmer had extreme importance besides the mitzvah itself, and that is, you were not allowed to eat of the grain of the new year until the Omer offering was brought. You could only eat from last year's grain. Right, so this is an issue in the Torah. You're not allowed to eat new grain until the Omer offering is brought. That's the issue called Chadash. So the Omer matired, it allowed the consumption of Chadash. Now today, we don't have an Omer. We don't have a Beis HaMikdash. So because we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, we don't have an Omer. So how do we ever get a heter to eat the new grain? And so the Gemara has a drasha in Maseches Rosh Hashanah that there are two different levels of how the new grain gets mutter. When there is a Beis HaMikdash, the new grain is forbidden until the Omer is brought. When there's no Beis HaMikdash, it is the passage of the day that matters. So the passage of the second day of Pesach is the 16th of Nisan. So it's still true. You're not allowed to eat the new grain until the 16th of Nisan. But once the 16th of Nisan comes, so then you can eat the new grain even without the Omer, because the Gemara has a drasha that when there's no Beis HaMikdash, it is the morning of the 16th that allows you to eat the Chadash. And Midrabanan, you have to wait another day. It's the morning of the 17th. That's Drabanan. They added an extra day to this, which actually means that even today you got to be concerned with new grain. So you may wonder, well, so how can I buy a sandwich? How can I buy bread? Well, now it's not a problem, by the way, because keep in mind, to understand what is called new grain, let me just explain something. Anything that took root before the second day of Pesach, even if it wasn't even harvested until later, will be mutter with the Omer or the 17th of Nisan. So in this time of year, you never have a problem with new grain, because anything that's on the market was was by definition harvested before Pesach and certainly planted before Pesach. So you're not going to get a Chadash problem till around Sukkot time. Because around Sukkot time, you'll already have some grain that may have been planted after Pesach that didn't come to market until around Sukkot. And theoretically, that grain is usher to eat. In Israel for sure, in Chutz La'aretz it's a big machlokas, till second day of Pesach. You see how it works? Because it's called the new grain. So this time of year, you don't have a new grain problem. But around Sukkot time, you'll have a new grain problem. So you're going to wonder, so now there's no problem with buying bread, buying sandwiches, no problem. But then they're going to ask me, well, what about after Sukkot? How can I buy a sandwich? Well, the answer once again is, if you have a reliable hashgacha, so they make sure. I mean, part of hashgacha, the same way they're supervising kosher, treif, truma, maser, they'll be supervising chadash and yashan, right? So if you have a reliable hashgacha, you don't have to worry about it. In America, however, there's a little bit of a problem. Let me explain. I don't drive you crazy. Life is hard enough as it is. And that is, there's a huge machlokas whether the prohibitions of new grain apply only to grain grown in Israel or grain even grown in Chutz La'aretz. Most of the American hashgachos, like the OU, take the lenient position that they're not concerned with chadash. So if you have an OU certified sandwich or an OU loaf of bread that you buy after Sukkot, it could very well have been from new grain, because the OU takes the position that chadash does not apply in grain that's grown chutz la'aretz. However, a Yarei Shemayim should in fact be machmir. So as a result, those who want to be extra meticulous on the laws of chadash will have a problem between Sukkot and Pesach. So what a lot of them do is, a lot of them buy their grain products right after Pesach for the whole year, and they keep them in their basement. So after Sukkot, their pasta, their cookies, whatever it would be, are going to be based on what they know is old grain as opposed to new grain. Okay, again, I don't want to confuse you. I'm not telling you what you have to follow. If you want to follow the OU Hashgacha, that's perfectly fine. They certainly have halachic sources upon which to rely. But I just wanted to bring this out just to show you that Bisman HaMikdash, the Omer, had actual importance beyond the individual mitzvah. It actually matired, it permitted the consumption of the new grain. And in Eretz Yisrael, there is no machlokas. The Yisra of Chadash Vaday applies. Right? In Chutz La'aretz, there's a machlokas. In Eretz Yisrael, there's no machlokas. But as I say, that's why every reputable hashgacha in Eretz Yisrael is certifying that it's not Chadash. Right? So that's not something you have to worry about. In Israel, if you want to be extra machmir in America, it's something to worry about, but only after Sukkot. Until Sukkot, it's not a problem because now all the grain predates Pesach, so it's considered to be old grain. It's not considered to be new grain. Okay, be it as it may, this is the idea of counting of the Omer. Now, there's a huge machlokas, Rishonim, if the mitzvah of counting the Omer today is a Torah commandment or only a rabbinic commandment. Now, why would there be a machlokas? I mean, the Torah says to count the days. So most Rishonim, Tosfos, for example, says, well, the Torah says you're supposed to count the days from the bringing of the Omer, which is the second day of Pesach. Today, we don't bring an Omer. We don't have a temple. So as a result, Tosfos says in Maseches Menachos that in the absence of an Omer sacrifice, the counting of the Omer is only a rabbinic law to commemorate what was done when there was a Beis HaMikdash. So Sviras HaOmer, according to Tosfos, Bizman Hazeh, is Midrabanan. The Rambam argues with Tosfos, and the Rambam says that if it's the second day of Pesach, you got to count the Omer under Torah law, and therefore it's a Doraisa even without the Korban Omer. Right? So that's an interesting machlokas. Now, obviously, whether something is Durabanan or Doraisa doesn't make a practical difference that much. You know, people sometimes say disparagingly, oh, it's only Rabbanan. No, we don't say that. You got to keep Rabbanans. So is there a practical, we say nafkamina, the word nafkamina, right? You know that Gemara language. Is there a difference? Whether it's Doraisa or Drabanan? Like, who cares? So there actually is a very interesting difference. You're not going to find it here so much, but in America you'll find it a lot. You know, here we always daven Ma'ariv after it's definitely night. We daven Ma'ariv when it's already dark. But in many minyanim, and even in Eretz Yisrael, Sephardim in particular, they sometimes daven Ma'ariv right after Mincha. They'll daven Mincha shortly before sunset, and they'll daven Ma'ariv right after sunset, even though it's not yet dark. Now, you know, in halacha, there are two stages in nightfall. Nightfall is very important because that's when the new day begins, right? The day begins at night. But what is night? There are actually two stages of night. There is Shkia. Shkia is sunset. And then, a certain amount of time after sunset, we have Tseis HaKochavim, the visibility of stars, 3 stars. And that may be anywhere between 20 minutes to 40 minutes after sunset. Now, once it's Tseis HaKochavim, it is definitely night. But in the period of time between sunset, called twilight, and the stars coming out, this is a very interesting period halachically. This is a period that is called Bein Hashmashos. And the best translation is just twilight. And what is the status of twilight? Chazal say it is a suffix. halachically, we're not sure. Do we treat it as night or do we treat it as day? Before sunset, it's Vadai day. After the stars come out, it's Vadai night. But between Shkia and Seis, Bein Hashmashos, Safek Yom, Safek Laila. Now this explains a very basic thing. That is why Shabbos is a little longer than 24 hours, because you gotta start Shabbos no later than sunset. But you can't end Shabbos till the stars come out. And we add some time to that too, but stars come out. Now, you might say, well, why is that so? Why can't I start Shabbos when the sun sets and end Shabbos when the sun sets? Or why can't I start Shabbos when the stars come out and end Shabbos when the stars come out? Now it's 24 hours. Why do I have to start Shabbos earlier and end Shabbos later? The answer is precisely because of Bein Hashmashos. Once the sun sets, we are halachically in doubt if it's night or day. If it's night, Shabbos has begun. If it's day, Shabbos theoretically it hasn't begun. So I got to be machmir Friday afternoon and treat it like night. Can't do malacha. But Saturday night is exactly the opposite. If it's night, Shabbos would be over. But if it's day, it's still Shabbos. So I got to be machmir and treat it like day. That's why I can't make Havdalah or I can't do malacha till Tzeitzah Kochava. So yeah, I'm being inconsistent. Friday afternoon, I'm treating Bein Hashmashos as night. And Saturday night, I'm treating Bein Hashmashos as day. So you might say, I'm being inconsistent. Well, I'm not being inconsistent because it is doubt. I got to be strict in both directions. And you know, if you did malacha Bein Hashmashos, whether you did it Friday night or whether you did it Saturday night, even if you were warned, you would not get the death penalty because it's not for sure that you were Machal Shabbos. Because Bein Hashmashos might be day, it might be night, right? So you wouldn't get a punishment for it, but you're not allowed to do the malacha. So now I'll come back to Omer. I didn't forget we're about the connection with the Omer in a minute, but let's take bris milah. Let's say, right, a child is supposed to be circumcised, if it's medically okay, on the 8th day. Okay? Now, let's say a child is born on Monday, so the 8th day of the bris is going to be Monday, next Monday. That's day 8. What if a child is born Monday, late afternoon, after sunset? Born after sunset, but before the stars came out. So halachically, we have a suffix. Is that a Monday baby or is that a Tuesday baby? Because if Bein Hashmashos is still daytime, he's a Monday baby and the bris is Monday. But if Bein Hashmashos is nighttime, he's a Tuesday baby and the bris would be Tuesday. So do I do the bris on Monday or do I do the bris on Tuesday? Answer, I got to do it on Tuesday. And the reason is simple. A late bris, even though you're not supposed to delay a bris, but a late bris is kosher. An early bris is invalid. So I can't do it on Monday because maybe Bein Hashmashos is night and Tuesday is the bris and Monday is day 7. But if I do it Tuesday, for sure it's going to be a kosher bris because if it's a Tuesday bris, Tuesday is day 8, which is great. But even if it's a Monday child, Tuesday is day 9, which is also good. So better to do a bris on day 9 than to do a bris on day 7. Day 7, the bris is totally puzzle. Now, let's take a variation of this, and then we'll see a very interesting halachic result. What if a baby is born Friday afternoon between sunset and the stars coming out. By the way, if you think that I'm making up funny situations, this happens quite often, actually. This is actually a pretty common shaila of a baby who's born Bein Hashmashos Friday. Now, here's the thing we know. There is a rule that we do a bris on Shabbos. That even though it involves bleeding and what would otherwise be desecrating of Shabbos, the mitzvah of bris overrides Shabbos. But that's only if it's a bris on the 8th day. If it's a bris that you're doing later for whatever reason, you don't do it on Shabbos, you got to wait till Sunday. Now, so here's the thing. If the baby is born Friday afternoon, after sunset, but before the stars come out, if Bein Hashmashos' day, he's a Friday baby, so the bris would be Shabbos. The bris would be Friday. If Bein Hashmashos' night, he's a Shabbos baby, so the bris would be Shabbos. So the two potential days are either Friday or Shabbos. But in reality, because it's a suffix, I can't do the bris on Friday, because Friday might be day 7 if Bein Hashmashos' night and he's a Shabbos baby. So you might think, okay, so do it on Shabbos, because Shabbos is either day 8, if Bein Hashmashos' night, so he's a Shabbos baby, or day 9. Here you got a problem. Because if Bein Hashmashos is daytime and it's a Friday baby, so the bris should be on Friday, and Shabbos is day 9, you can't do a Shabbos bris on day 9. So you know what you got to do? You got to do the bris on Sunday. Now Sunday, for sure, it's not even a suffix. Sunday for sure is the wrong day. Because if Bein Hashmashos of Friday is day, the bris should be on Friday. If Bein Hashmashos is night, the bris should be on Shabbos. So your only choice is Friday, Shabbos, but you can't do it on Friday because maybe it's too early. You can't do it on Shabbos because maybe it's a 9th day. You got to do it on Sunday, which is either day 9 or day 10. But for sure, you are not Mikayem, the mitzvah of a bris on the 8th day. There's no choice. It's unavoidable. Hashem, it's God's fault, so to speak, because he timed the birth that particular time. But this would be an interesting example where you literally would not be able to do the bris on the 8th day for a non-medical obviously there are many cases of medical reasons why we might delay a bris, but in a case where, this might be a kind of a quiz question you could bring. No, when will a person not get a bris on the 8th day, even if there's no medical problem? And one of the answers, you can come up with other answers too, but one of the answers would be when he is born Bein Hashmashot, Friday afternoon. Now, if he's born Bein Hashmashot, Motzei Shabbos, that's really no problem. You'll just do the bris on Sunday. You won't do the bris on Shabbos. So Sunday is either day 8 or day 9. But when it's Friday, then you're going to have the problem. You're going to bedafka do the bris on the wrong day. Yeah.
At some point in the past, is it like a lost Masorah, or do we ever know if it was day or night?
That's a very excellent question, because it is very, very unusual. In fact, this may be unique in halacha, in which the halacha just throws up its hands and says, don't know. And it's tempting to think that this might be something that we lost, but it appears not. It appears to have been a safek, I don't know, from Moshe Rabbeinu's time, whatever it would be. Let me just remind you, if any of you come from around the equator, probably not, there is no twilight in the equator, meaning to say, in the equator, as soon as the sun sets, it's totally dark. So, and that's why the closer you are to the equator, the shorter the duration of twilight is. And as you may notice, that in Israel, it actually gets dark relatively quickly after sunset. In America, or France, or England, or Europe, it takes longer. So that's actually why Shabbos is actually over earlier in Eretz Yisrael than it is in America, and that's because the twilight period is shorter as you get closer to the equator. By the way, this is not affected by summer or winter. This is not a summer-winter thing. This is the whole year it's that way. And therefore, since Bein Hashmashot is defined as the time between sunset and stars coming out, the amount of time will vary from around 40 minutes in the United States, let's say, to as little as 20 minutes, which means, strictly speaking, I mean, again, we don't follow this halachically because of the mitzvah of adding on to Shabbos, but Shabbos could be over in Eretz Yisrael as early as 20 minutes after sunset. Okay, we don't do that, but certainly 35 minutes we do. Many people do end Shabbos 35 minutes. In America, it is never ended before 42 to 45 minutes. And the reason for that difference is the further north or south you are from the equator, the longer the so-called twilight period is, which is called halachically Bein Hashmashot. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, you first, yeah.
What's Mincha Ketana?
Yeah, so Mincha Ketana Mincha Gedola is simply this. Mincha Gedola is 6.5 halachic hours from sunrise. By a halachic hour, I mean 1/12 of the day. An hour could be longer or shorter depending on sunrise to sunset. And therefore, Mincha Gedola is the earliest time you could daven Mincha, 6.5 hours. So let's take a perfect even day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So Mincha Gedola would be 12:30. But it wouldn't always be 12:30. In the summer, it might be later. Okay. Mincha Ketana is much closer to the evening. It is 2.5 hours before sunset. So that, some people say, is the better preferred time to daven Mincha because you want to daven in the afternoon rather than at the very beginning of the noon, right? So Mincha Ketana, Mincha Gedola, 6.5 hours from sunset. Mincha Ketana is, well, measuring the other, 2.5 hours before. I'm sorry. Mincha Gedola is 6.5 hours from sunrise, and Mincha Ketana is 2.5 hours from sunset. So that would be 9.5 hours from sunrise. But remember the definition of a halachic hour. This is very important. A halachic hour is not 60 minutes. A halachic hour is the number is 1/12 of the minutes from sunrise to sunset. So a halachic hour in the winter may be as short as 50 minutes, and a halachic hour in the summer may be as long as 72 minutes. Now you got to measure sunrise, sunset, 1/12 of that time. And that's true. Anything that depends on hours, like Shema has to be said, within the first 3 hours of the day. Shachris is supposed to be said within the first 4 hours of the day. Mincha Gedola is 6.5 hours. Mincha Ketana is 9.5 hours. You're not allowed to eat chametz after 4 hours of the day, right? A lot of stuff is hours. Everything that's connected to hours are always halachic hours. The hours have different lengths depending on sunrise to sunset. Yeah.
So would it be, how about when we're talking in terms of eating milk and meat, like in the winter?
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's
It would be shorter.
no. That's actually a very interesting question. No, every rule has exceptions. There are opinions. There are indeed opinions that say that the 6 hours for meat and milk is also based on halachic hours, which would lead to the interesting thing that in the summer you might have to wait 7 hours, 7 fixed hours, and in the winter maybe only 4.5 hours or whatever it would be. So there is such an opinion, but Lamaisa we don't pass in that way because this is something that we go with a fixed hour because the idea of not having milk within 6 hours is based on the taste of the meat in your mouth, and that wears out after 6 hours. So that's going to be a fixed thing because that simply depends on your body responding, and your body doesn't get rid of the taste in the winter faster than it does in the summer. Okay, so it's a very good point, but that would be an example where we don't apply the concept of halachic hours. Now, let me just swing back and talk about why this is relevant for the Omer. In the United States and in some shows for Sephardim here too, they often daven Arvit. They daven Ma'ariv early. They daven Ma'ariv before the stars are out. And people say Shema later, but they daven Ma'ariv early. So the big question is, are you allowed to count Omer before the stars come out? Now, can you count the Omer bein hashmashos? Right? Can I make a bracha? Can I count the Omer bein hashmashos? So let's think this through. We have a famous rule that whenever a mitzvah is a Torah mitzvah, you got to err on the side of strictness. Right? This is the famous rule. All doubts regarding Torah laws, you must be strict. Right? Famous rule. Safek d'oraisa l'chumra. If I don't remember if I recited benching on food, I got to recite it because benching on food is a Torah commandment. If I don't remember if I davened mincha, I don't daven because davening mincha is rabbanan, and a safek on a rabbinic law, you're lenient. Right? Famous rule: safek d'oraisa l'chumra, safek d'rabbanan l'kula. Now, bein hashmashos is a safek if it's day or night. So, if it's day, I can't count the new day of the Omer yet. If it's night, I could. So am I allowed to give myself the benefit of the doubt? So it depends. According to Tosfos, that the counting of the Omer today, when there's no korban of the Omer, is only a rabbinic law. Based on the rule that safek of rabbinic laws, I could be lenient, I could count bein hashmashot because I'm allowed to assume that it's nighttime and it's the next day. So according to Tosfos, I can make the bracha on the Omer and count the Omer. But according to the Rambam, I would not be able to. Because according to the Rambam, since the mitzvah of counting the Omer even today is a Torah commandment, on a Torah commandment, I got to be strict. I can't give myself the benefit of the doubt that maybe bein hashmashot is the next night, because maybe not. Maybe it's still the day. So according to the Rambam, I'm going to have to wait. So how does this work lahalacha? So the way this works lahalacha is the following. If you are the chazan, let's assume the chazan counts the Omer instead of the rabbi, let's say. If you're the chazan and you're in a minyan that's davening before the stars come out, bein hashmashos, so you're allowed to make the bracha and you're allowed to count the Omer, because most opinions follow Tosfos that the Omer is drabanan and you can give yourself the benefit of the doubt. But when you get home, in order to fulfill the view of the Rambam, you should count after dark, after Tzeiser Kochavim, you should count again without a bracha, and count the Omer again, to be Yotzei all of the Shitas. Now that's if you're a chazan. If, however, you're not a chazan, you're just davening in the minyan, it actually would be better for you not to say not to count at all, because you don't have that pressure, and just have in mind that when you get home, and that's after Tzeiser Kochavim, you will count with a bracha. However, even if you're not a chazan, if you think there's a risk that you're going to forget, then it would still be better to count early with the bracha, and then if you remember later, count again. If you don't remember later, at least you were yotzei, like Tosfos, the counting of the Omer early, and you would be allowed to continue counting with the bracha. Everyone knows the halacha of forgetting, because this is such a common scenario, especially in the beginning. The most likely time that you're going to forget a day of the Omer is in Pesach itself, the very first few days. That's when you're not used to it yet, and that's where forgetting is more likely. Once you've been doing it for a few weeks, it's going to be a habit. So just to remind you of the halakha, I'm sure everybody knows, this is one of the halakhas almost everybody knows, but just to be sure you know this, If you forgot to count the Omer at night, or even if you did count, but you counted the wrong day, so you can correct yourself by counting the next day correctly without a bracha. And if you corrected yourself the next day and counted without a bracha, the following night you can resume with a bracha. With a bracha every night. And no matter how many times you had to correct yourself during the day, you can always resume the following night with a bracha. If, on the other hand, you forgot not only to count at night, but you forgot to correct yourself during the day, so then you've lost the ability to make the bracha. You still count, but you count without a bracha. What you try to do is you try to go to shul, so when the chazan or the rav makes the bracha, they should have kavanah to be motzi you. Or you can hear the bracha from a friend. You can ask your friend to say, when you say the bracha, have me in mind. But if you miss a whole day, and you didn't, in other words, you missed the night and you didn't correct yourself during the day, you can no longer count with a bracha. And that's based on the idea that the Torah describes the counting of the Omer as tamimos. Tamimos means 7 complete weeks. So the idea is, if you miss a day, your counting is no longer complete. In fact, the Minchas Chinuch has a fascinating, interesting shaila about a goy who converts in the middle of the counting of the Omer period. Right? He was a non-Jew, and then he converts today. So does he start counting the Omer, or do we say, oh, it's too late, he missed it already, right? So he's like a Jew who missed a day. Or do I say, no, his count starts from today, he doesn't have to worry. Or even a shayla about a bar mitzvah boy, a boy who becomes bar mitzvah in the middle of the Omer. Is he either he didn't count as a kid, or even if he counted, but he was a katan, so it didn't count as a mitzvah. Is he able to make a bracha for the rest of the sfira? Every bar mitzvah boy who has his bar mitzvah during the Omer period will always speak about this Minchas Chinuch. I can guarantee you the Devar Torah that you will hear will be about this very, very shayla. But in case you're curious, la halacha we paskin, the bar mitzvah boy can continue. In other words, he makes the bracha. The guy, maybe not. The guy is more problematical. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
If you let's say it gets to the next day of the Omer, and you can't remember whether you counted the previous day, you can still count with the bracha, right?
Yeah, so if you don't know if you missed, you can still count with the bracha, because that's called the double doubt. First of all, maybe you didn't miss. And even if you missed, some opinions allow you to make a bracha. So when you have that double doubt, yeah.
Think that each day is its own mitzvah?
Yes.
Right?
In other words, this rule that if you miss a day, you don't make a bracha, it is in fact a machlokas. There are opinions that say every day stands alone. And in fact, they point to the obvious point that every day we make a separate bracha. Now, if you're going to tell me this is one mitzvah to count a single unit of 49 days, and if I miss a day, I don't have the mitzvah, then why would I recite a separate bracha every day? So yeah, there are definitely opinions that say you could make a bracha. We say it's a safek, and therefore we don't make a bracha. Yeah.
Why does a person need to count the Omer out loud versus if you're in shul, your necessary went a little long and you missed it and forgot a day? But the whole point of the Omer, like we're trying to build anticipation for Shavuos, whatever it is. It seems like if you're in the middle of Mir, Bel Yeshiva, something, everyone's counting the Omer, you're building anticipation, you know what day it is, but you forgot to say it yourself. It's weird that we're saying that, but you didn't say it yourself, so you can't say it with the rest.
Yeah. So I think the concept very much is that, again, the general idea of the Omer, you understand what's going on here. You want to connect the freedom of Pesach with the obligations of Shavuos. Going back to the barley and wheat analogy, that freedom is only valuable when it's connected to Torah. So I think the Torah is emphasizing the notion of personal responsibility here. You can't just say, oh, Baruch Hashem, I live in a community where so many people learn. Well, that's great, but you got to learn. Meaning to say, the ritual of Sfiras HaOmer is kind of giving you a message that you have to take personal responsibility and involvement in your avodas Hashem, and you can't simply rely on other people to do your heavy lifting for you. Of course, we want to be part of a community. Of course, that's true. But you can't just say, oh, it's so great that I have so many people who learn in my show. Well, what about you? What about your learning in your show, right? So I think that itself is part of the message. Yeah.
So if for davening mincha, it's not related to the American position.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you can only daven mincha for mincha gedola, and you can't daven at night, so you have this brackets. Why is mincha ketana there if you can daven after it anyway? What can you know?
Why is Mincha Ketana what?
Why is there a time step of mincha ketana?
No. Mincha Ketana is not relevant if you daven to Mincha Gedola, but
If you haven't yet.
no, because that's a big machlokas, because some opinions actually say that Mincha Ketana is the better time to daven Mincha, because it corresponds to when they brought the afternoon sacrifice in the Beis HaMikdash. So Mincha Ketana is held as an optimal time for Mincha. Now you may ask, well, if Mincha Ketana is the best time to daven Mincha, then why do we in Yeshiva daven Mincha Gedola? The answer is because we don't want to interrupt the learning sessions, meaning that's the cheshbon. Meaning in the abstract, when you're planning your schedule, Mincha Ketana would be better. It's the better time to daven Mincha. But for Bittul Torah, we'll do Mincha during a break between the Seders, so that way we won't have to interrupt our learning for Mincha and the like. Yeah.
Can you daven the time limit though for Mincha Ketana? You have like 2 hours left.
2.5 hours, yeah.
So can you daven later than that? But before.
Well, yeah. Mincha Ketana, meaning any point from Mincha Ketana on is an optimal time to daven Mincha, as long as you finish it before sunset.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. So if you daven 10 minutes before sunset, you davened within the Mincha Ketana period, so you're doing fine.
You have to start before sunset.
No, you should finish. The Mishnah Berurah is pretty strict. He actually said, now there's machlokas, what if you finish the silent, can you do the repetition after Shkia? That's that's a machlokas. But certainly the silent Amida should be finished before sunset. Now you may ask me, aren't there many Hasidim who daven after sunset? And the answer is yes. It's a little complicated. They have a different definition of sunset based on Rabbeinu Tam. Maybe sometime I'll give you a share in this. Just, it's technical, it's technical, but just you'll understand Rabbeinu Tam, these different opinions. But if you're asking me as a regular mainstream Ben Torah, you should finish your Amida before sunset. Absolutely, yeah.
Is that timing with the Hasidim thing similar with last time to say Shema? Because sometimes I feel like they're davening later than like Shachris is later than last time to say Shema.
Let me say this. I'll have to hold it over, but let me just say this. Davening Mincha after sunset is much more defensible than saying Shema late, meaning there is an argument based on what is the definition of sunset that will allow them to go late, but that would not justify the Shema in the morning. So that is a real problem. And there may not be a good answer for that. But in terms of late Mincha, again, as I say, there is a big machlokas. What do we mean by sunset? Is sunset, or is sunset something a little later than sunset? And the like. And that's Rabbeinu Tam versus the Gaonim. Yeah.
What's the latest time to daven Shema in the morning?
So, well, the latest time halachically is you have to have said Shema by the end of 3 hours, which is one quarter of the day from sunrise. This now you have to look at a calendar. It changes every week, but now it's around, I think 9:05 or 9:10. I don't have the exact time, but that. What time did you see with it?
14
Well, okay, so you're going with the Vilna Gaon's time.
I just use an app.
Okay, so, all right. It's between 9:05 and 9:40 because there are two ways of calculating it. Yeah, maybe I'll actually spend this year.
Is it 40?
Say what?
Is it 14 or 40?
No, I think it would be, I think the Vilna Gaon's time would be 40.
Oh,
But the earlier time, which is like 9:10 or so. Okay? But it's certainly before 9:30, it's before 9:45, right? 9:40 would be the absolute latest. Okay.
Thank you for listening to this Omer production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.